If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the masquerade. In this episode, we're going to go through everything you need to know in order to create your own vampire in Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition, or V5 as the fledgelings call it these days. Before we properly sink our teeth into tonight's episode, you'll need a few things in order to create your first kindred in V5. First and foremost, you will need a copy of the V5 core book, either as a physical or a PDF copy if you are a weirdo or allergic to books or something. If you are playing the game old school with the archaic devices known as pen and paper, you may have a friend or two who is willing to lend you their copy, but as more and more fledglings are seeking the likes of Discord and Roll20 to play, it is highly unlikely someone will just lend you a book from afar. You can purchase the physical book from most digital outlets, and most game shops do stock copies of V5, whilst PDF copies can be officially found on the Mordifius Entertainment website. I am going to presume that if you are here, you know a little bit about VTM and have a basic understanding of how some, if not all, the clans work. You may have seen some online chronicles such as LA by Night by Geek and Sundry, Chicago by Night by Near Dark Studios, and Savage City by Caffeinated Conquests, or played Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which led you here, or other online chronicles, which in turn led you here anyway. I won't go too in-depth with the clan laws for now. Instead, I'll give you a very brief overview of the playable clans in V5. The Bruja, or Bruja, were once philosophical monarchs of an ancient civilization, but are now deadbeat rebels. The Gangrel resemble the beasts associated with vampires more than any other clan. Clan Malkavian are broken by madness, each one ranging from unhinged to batshit crazy. The Nosferatu range from weird-looking or hideously disfigured upon their embrace, so they hide in sewers away from kind eyes. If you want to find out something, go and speak to one of them, as they hoard secrets. The Toreadors enjoy every sensual pleasure that unlife has to offer them. They appear to like pretty fiends, but it is all terribly forced to make them seem as human as possible. The Tremere became vampires through treachery and trickery, wielding supernatural blood magic and impressive knowledge. And through their self-imposed entitlement and greed, the Ventru are often the iron fist that rules a given city, imposing their own wills and traditions onto kindred society. Finally, whilst technically not clans within themselves, V5 also allows players to play as the clanless Caitiff and Finnbloods, who are far more fleshed out in V5 than they ever have been before. Rumours and whispers speak of the other clans being introduced in future V5 books, such as Clan Sombra, inhumane nobles who are able to manipulate the darkness around them, in the upcoming Chicago by Night V5 book. There are also options to play as the Banu Hakim, previously the Assamites, who are undead assassins if you buy the V5 Camarilla lore book. And you can also play as the followers of Set, who have recently rebranded themselves as the Ministry, should you purchase the V5 Anarch lore book. The Ministry adopts the idea that Set, the Egyptian god of the underworld, is their maker, and do what they can to manipulate those around them whilst protecting their own strange artifacts. Finally, it is possible to play as a human or ghoul in V5, but this episode will be focusing purely on making true vampires. Once you have the core book and any other V5 source books you want, you'll need a character sheet. The Mordifius Entertainment website offers free PDF copies, but these cannot be altered digitally. You'll have to look elsewhere to find an interactive PDF character sheet. For this episode, I will be using the mrgon.rocksolidshells.com interactive sheet, but there are others available, should you wish to use a different format. It should be noted you cannot use previous character sheets whilst making V5 characters, for reasons we will soon explore. With that preparation shenanigans biting the dust, one can now begin to create their V5 character. There is no system or dice roll to be made when determining your character's clan, unless you really want to. You can choose whichever one you want to roleplay in your story. VTM uses the storyteller system, which encourages players to become one with their character, to embrace them, as it were. The kindred of the world of darkness, the universe in which VTM exists, usually do not embrace mortals willy-nilly, meaning that there must be a reason as to why you were embraced by your sire. What sort of person were they in life? What did they do? How did they go about doing it? Where and when were they embraced? These are just some of the questions that should come to mind when building your character, as it is their life as Kain, a human, that will determine the stats and concepts. Starting at the top of the page, you should be able to fill most of these out by yourself. Name is obviously your character's name, but it's worth putting your actual name for the storyteller as well, who would receive a copy of your character sheet upon playing. Concept is your character's notions. For example, a Tremere stage magician, Nosferatu hacker, or Ventru CEO. The examples I just gave are stereotypes for those clans, but there is nothing from stopping you wanting to be a Brujar journalist or a Toreador kickboxer. In many ways, these two weirder examples fit into the archetypes rather nicely, providing you use a bit of imagination. Clan is whatever clan you are in, including Caitiff, Finnblood, Human and Ghoul. Generation is how far or close your vampiric blood is to the mythic progenitor Cain. Vampires are one generation weaker than their sire. So, if your sire was Generation 11 an Ancile, you would be Generation 12, a neonate or fledgling depending on when you were embraced. In V5, the only generations you can play as are as Ancile, which are Generations 10 and 11, and neonates, which are Generations 12 and 13. Most sessions encourage players to be neonates, as each older generation becomes progressively more powerful, and find it much easier to break the storyteller's game. If you are a Finnblood character, they are Generation 14 to 16. Finally, there is your sire. Your character may not even know their sire, but this piece of information, or lack of thereof, helps to build your character's backstory. If your character is sireless, think how your character has survived on their own up until the first in-game session. As for my example character, his name is Steve, a flirty, cocky, perverted jazz musician embraced in the 1980s by Big Mama Martha, a Toreador old-school R&B singer, paranoid that the popularity of greased hair, rock guitars and synth galore will kill jazz. Steve works as a jazz pianist in a local jazz bar and feels that his career is stagnating, as less and less people come into the bar to enjoy jazz. Enticed by Martha, he accepts her embrace and makes it his mission in undead life to oar jazz back into the mainstream as a neonate. If you have done everything correctly, you should have 3 boxes left to fill out. Ambition and desire are very similar to each other in definition and as a gameplay mechanic. They are both things that your character wants, with desire being a session-by-session want and ambition being long-term. Thus, some online interactive sheets only have ambition. Not only are they a good way for building your character, but they act as a way for your character to regain willpower, should either your ambition or desires are met. Willpower is a resource in Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition that can be used sparingly to get you out of a tight situation. Then there is Predator type, which is one of my personal favourite additions to V5. This is how your vampire usually hunts, each one having their own merits, flaws, and other goodies. There are 10 to choose from. Alley cats have no real preference how they get their blood, even if it means taking a more direct approach. Baggers steal or buy cold blood bags from somewhere, which may cause masquerade complications further down the line. Ventrus can't choose this predator type. Blood leeches feed on other vampires, which is a huge no-no in kindred society, which can add to some interesting plot twists. Cleavers feed from a mortal family, whether it is your own or one you had a close connection to as a mortal, which again is another masquerade issue. Consensualists, as the word implies, never feed against their victim's will. Farmers feed on animals. Ventrus can't choose this predator type, or if your blood potency, another resource, is 3 or higher. Those who choose Osiris feed on fans or worshippers who idolize you as a deity of sorts. Scene Queen is similar to Osiris, but they feed on a subculture of people you belong to, rather than the masses who love and adore you. Sandmen, or women, feed on those who are sleeping. Finally, sirens feed while feigning or during sex. Sounds straightforward, but remember that a vampire is dead and requires concentration to get it on. To add all of this new information to Steve, he currently has the ambition of owning the jazz bar he performs at. I have decided that he is a scene queen, as he would be known by the local jazz admirers and would, therefore, find it easier to feed upon them. Jazz, of course, not being as popular as EDM or pop music, so he wouldn't be a worldwide celebrity. As a scene queen, Steve can add a specialty to his etiquette, leadership, or streetwise skills. I feel leadership is most appropriate, as he would want to coax people into doing what he wants. As a musician, often in a band, he may take the role of telling his fellow musicians when to play, when to solo, etc. In gameplay terms, the specialty would be organising group tactics. This would allow me to add 1 dice to anything regarding that particular specialty. For example, if I had 3 points in the leadership skill and the storyteller thought it was appropriate for me to use my specialty, I would roll 4 for leadership, not 3. With the Scene Queen Predator type, Steve also gets 1 point in the Dominate or Potence disciplines. Both are not usually found tutoriadors. Given that Steve is going to be talking his way out of his problems a lot, I will give him the level Dominate power Cloud Memory, which will allow Steve to make people forget a recent action, which will be perfect for feeding on people in the jazz bar. In addition, Steve receives 1 fame and contact advantage backgrounds. This means I am known in a particular subculture, in this case, jazz lovers, and I have 1 contact who can get something done for me. Having 1 point in contact also gives Steve a point in resources, which gives him a small amount of money, a car, apartment, etc. You choose what it is, put it down on the sheet somewhere. Steve also gains a couple of flaws. I can choose to be disliked outside of my subculture, or prey exclusion, which is to say, not feed from those outside of my subculture. I will include Steve's backstory in this and say that he can't feed on EDM clubgoers, as he believes that the blood of jazz lovers is far more refined and sophisticated than the simplistic dance music of today. Feeding outside of Steve's subculture will grant him stains, which affects one's humanity. Now that you have established some lore regarding your character, you should have an idea what sort of person they are when you assign your points and attributes. How do they solve their problems? Fighting, thinking, or talking? How would they naturally interact with the world? The attribute section is made up of 3 categories: physical, mental, and social, and the way you assign the points is by doing the following. 1 attribute gets 4 points, 3 attributes get 3 points, 4 attributes get 2 points, and 1 attribute gets 1 point. The 4 pointer is what your character is best at, and the 1 point is what your character is worst at. Once you have those filled out, you can then determine your character's health and willpower. In V5, health is stamina plus 3, and willpower is composure plus resolve. In the case of Steve, he is not terribly strong, and being a flirty, pervy musician, he thinks himself as a charismatic ladies' man. So his strength is at 1, and his charisma is at 4. Resolve, composure, and dexterity all have 3, because I believe they all relate to Steve being on stage and tickling those ebonies and ivories. The rest, stamina, manipulation, wits, and intelligence, all have 2 points. Steve's health is at 5, for his stamina is at 2, plus 3 is 5, so he cannot take too much of a beating before reaching the final death. His willpower, however, is considered to be rather high, for both his resolve and composure are 3, and 3 plus 3 is 6. In the game, dice rolls in VTM are usually made up of 1 attribute plus a skill, as there are many ways of demonstrating feats, intelligence, and social behaviours, unless you are wanting to deadlift a donkey, for example, as that would be pure strength. The skills are divided up into, from left to right, physical, social, and mental. The way you can distribute points in V5 can be done in 3 ways. Your character may be a jack of all trades, so you would put 1 skill at 3, 8 skills at 2, and 10 skills at 1. Or they can be more balanced, so you put 3 skills at 3, 5 skills at 2, and 7 skills at 1. Or finally, your character may be somewhat of a specialist, so you put 1 skill at 4, 3 skills at 3, 3 skills at 2, and 3 skills at 1. A Again, think how your character would interact with the world and solve problems. Fighting, thinking, or talking. How could they naturally interact with the world? Don't just make your character a powerhouse or super brainy just because you think you're gonna win the game. Vampire the Masquerade is not about winning the game per se. It's a social drama filled with politics and personal horror. As already mentioned, Steve is very much a social character, hoping to talk his way out of problems. Being a pianist, it is performance status at a 4, making him a specialist. As for the rest, I have put 3 points in persuasion, subterfuge and awareness. Drive, etiquette, insight and intimidation all have 2 points, and firearms, larceny, survival, streetwise all have 1 point. If you have put any points into academics, craft, performance and science, you can assign specialties to those. You can also take 1 more specialty in any other skill you've put points in. As you may remember, Steve has 4 points in performance, so I decided to give him a specialty in jazz piano, so whenever he's playing jazz on the piano, I get to use 1 extra dice. In addition, I gave Steve a specialty with persuasion when talking to the opposite sex, as I imagine Steve to be the frustrated and horny toreador, and he would use his utmost best to coax the females. Next we move on to disciplines, which of course are your vampiric powers. In V5, you start by choosing 2 of your 3 in-clan disciplines and put 2 points into one and 1 point into the other. Each discipline has 5 levels, each one having stronger powers than the last level you choose from. You can choose 1 power from within that level whenever you put a point into a particular discipline. When you increase a discipline's level, you can either choose 1 level from your current level or the other power from the previous level. This sounds a little bit confusing, so allow me to use Steve again as my example. Steve is a toreador who has access to the disciplines Presence, Celerity and Auspex. I will assign Steve 1 point in Celerity and 2 points in Presence. For level 1 Celerity, Steve can choose Cat's Grace or Rapid Reflexes. I shall give Steve the latter, which gives him a bit more of a chance of surviving a fight. For level 1 Presence, Steve can use Awe or Daunt. Steve will choose Awe, which will make him the centre of attention, which will make it easier for him to pass persuasion-based checks. For level 2 Presence, Steve can choose Lingering Kiss or Daunt from level 1. Being a manipulative pervert, Steve will choose Lingering Kiss, which will entice mortals he feeds from back for more, as the kiss is compared to that of an orgasm in sensation, and the Lingering Kiss being a super powerful version of it. If your character is a caitiff, you can choose any 2 disciplines and put 2 points into one and 1 in the other. Thin Bloods have no disciplines, but they can learn Thin Blood Alchemy at a later stage if you have purchased the Thin Blood Alchemist merit. Now we move on to your advantages, which is where you purchase merits and flaws for your character. You have to spend 7 points in merits plus 2 points in flaws, in addition to the ones you gained from your predator types. For example, Steve is unboundable, which means he cannot be bloodbound. This uses 4 merit points. He has also put 2 points into Haven, which gives him a good-sized home, with a point in Luxury, which totals up to 7 advantages. However, V5 states that if one does not have 3 points in resources, the items obtained in your points in Luxury have been obtained illegally, which I thought encouraged the 1 point in the Dark Secret flaw. I came up with the idea that Steve killed his sire, who was a tad on the oppressive side, not knowing about the perks of diablerie at the time. And finally, because I'm a huge fan of ironic humour, Steve also has the mythic flaw Stigmata, which means he bleeds from open wounds from hands, feet and his forehead when he has reached hunger level 4, which of course isn't terribly attractive for an attractive toreador. Now if your character is a Thin Blood, they must take between 1 to 3 Thin Blood merits and the same number of Thin Blood flaws. I won't go over them for now because I am wanting to cover them in the Thin Blood Lore podcast episode in the near future. We now reach the convictions and touchstones part of your character creation. We all have those who are close to us, whether we love them or hate them. These are our touchstones. The convictions are moral or immoral guidelines that your character follows. You would roleplay these, and you can restore willpower should you stick to them, or have stains to your humanity should you go against them. They usually take the form of, I will always do this, or I will always do that. You can choose up to 3 convictions, and for every conviction you choose, you must have the same number of touchstones. With Steve, he has the contact merit, remember, who I decided is his bodyguard, Rodrigo, who he's rather fond of. He has another touchstone, James, a rival jazz guitarist. For his convictions, they are, thou shalt always protect an innocent lady, and I must always come on top. This is similar to the chronicled tenets, but you and the other players should decide what these should be. For example, you and the other players may decide that there should be no racism, or not to eat from children, or no explicit torture, etc., etc. Consider these house rules, as it were. These should be treated like your convictions, so if you go out of your way to break them, you gain stains on your humanity. Once all of this is done, set your humanity to 7. Now, I know what you're thinking. You may have noticed that the alley cat predator type takes away a point of humanity. Please, my fledgling, ignore that for now. Set your points of humanity to 7. We are almost at the very end of the character creation process, and there are just some final touches that we need to put onto your character sheet. If your character is a fledgling who was embraced within the last 15 years, or yesterday, like a really short space of time, or a thin blood character, which are generation 14, 15 or 16, set your blood potency to 0. If you're generation 12 or 13, set the potency to 1. Once you've done that, hooray, you're done. You can stop listening to the podcast now and tune in next time. But I'm sure you want to find out what to do if you're making an ancillary or a much older neonate. Well, I say much older, but you know what I mean. Now, if we're to go by the V5 core book definition of a neonate, they are embraced between 1940 and a decade ago. They are generation 12 or 13, and they have a blood potency point of 1. In addition, you have 15 experience points to spend on whatever you want, within reason, which we'll explore in a little moment. Ancillae have a bit more options available to them, being somewhat older and stronger and closer to Cain. They are vampires embraced between 1780 and 1940, so they could potentially be a couple of 100 years old. They are generations 10 or 11, have blood potency of 2. They are also given 2 points to spend on advantages and 2 points to spend on flaws. You must also subtract 1 point from their humanity, so you can see why I wanted you to hold off from taking away humanity because of your alley cat predator type. So how do you spend experience points in Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition from here onwards? Well, to increase an attribute, it's the new level times 5. To increase a skill, it's the new level times 3. To add a new specialty, it's 3 points. To increase a clan discipline, that's the new level times 5. To increase an outside of clan discipline, that's the new level times 7. If you're cative, it's the new level times 6. To increase a blood sorcery ritual, it's the ritual level times 3. To increase a thin blood formula, it's the formula level times 3. To increase an advantage, that's 3 per dot. And to increase your blood potency, that's the new level times 10. To return to Sexy Steve the Toreador once more as our example tonight, I decided to increase his dominate level to number 2, granting him the discipline power, Compel, which makes people do what he wants, provided there's simple instructions, of course. Now, to do this, it is his new level times 7, because dominate is not found for Toreadors usually, and 2 times 7 is 14. This means I have 1 point left over. Once you have finished adding these freebie points, you can finally say that you have made your presumably first VTM V5 character. Yes, the book has all that you need to understand the character creation process, but I have found that it sometimes helps to have someone walk you through the process, rather than nag your storyteller 100 times, which is exactly what I did when I first played. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you will be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.